My brother faked my death and stole $580,000 while I worked in Iceland, but when I came back and exposed him, now he's in prison for 25 years and lost everything he stole from me. I'm 30 years old. I work as a digital cartographer, and it's been like a year and a half since I came back from Iceland after being there for 3 years, basically disconnected from the world. And when I returned, I discovered that my older brother had faked my death and literally stole my entire life. I know, it sounds like a bad thriller movie, but I swear every word of this is real, and there are still days when I wake up and can't believe all of this happened. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I accepted that job in Iceland. It was 2019. I was 27 years old, and they offered me this incredible opportunity to work on a digital cartography project in a super remote area of Iceland, like in the middle of nowhere, mapping volcanic terrains and glaciers for a climate research project. The contract was for 3 years. The pay was excellent. But the thing is, the place where I was going to be was so remote that there was basically no consistent internet signal. I could only communicate with my family like once a month when I went to the nearest town that was hours away. My mom was worried, obviously, but I was excited. It was a career opportunity I couldn't pass up. Before leaving, I needed someone to handle my stuff here, pay bills, manage my house, that kind of thing. My brother Zachary, who was 2 years older than me, offered to help me. Zachary had always been the responsible brother, the one who had his life super organized. He was married to Stephanie. They had a daughter, Abigail, who was like 7 years old at the time. He worked in finance. Everything seemed to be in order with him. So I gave him power of attorney so he could manage my affairs while I was away. It seemed like the most logical thing, right? He was my brother. I trusted him completely. The first months in Iceland were intense, but incredible. The work was demanding, the conditions were harsh, but I loved it. I talked to my mom when I could, sent occasional emails to some friends. But the truth is, I was so into the work that I didn't miss constant communication that much. Zachary sent me reports every month about finances. Everything seemed fine, the house was in order, bills were being paid on time. My mom told me he visited her often, that he was being super attentive to her, especially after my dad had passed away like 2 years before I left. Everything seemed perfect. You know what I mean? The 3 years flew by, honestly. There were difficult moments, obviously. The isolation sometimes weighed on me, but the work was fascinating, and I felt like I was contributing to something important. My plan was to finish the contract in March 2022 and come back home. But then, like 2 weeks before my contract ended, my main camera broke, and I urgently needed a new one to finish the project. I decided to go to Reykjavik, which was the nearest big city, like 6 hours from where I was, to buy a new one and take advantage of using decent internet and catch up with everyone. I arrived in Reykjavik on a Tuesday afternoon, I think, or maybe it was Wednesday. I don't remember exactly. I checked into a hotel, bought the camera, and then went to a cafe with Wi-Fi to check my social media and emails. I had like 1,000 Facebook notifications I had ignored for months. I started scrolling casually, seeing friends' photos, random updates, and then I saw something that literally froze me. It was a post from my college friend Trevor, from like a year and a half ago, that said something like, "Still can't believe Cameron is gone. Rest in peace, brother." I just stared at the screen, not understanding anything. Rest in peace? What the hell was he talking about? I kept scrolling, and there were more posts, many more. My ex-girlfriend Kimberly had posted an old photo of us with a long message about how she missed me. Other friends from college had shared memories. My mom had posted childhood photos of me, with messages about my beautiful son who is no longer here. I felt like I was in a parallel dimension or something. My hands started shaking, and I had to put the phone down on the table because I literally couldn't hold it. I wrote to Trevor immediately on Messenger, like, "Bro, what's all this rest in peace shit? I'm alive, obviously." He responded in like 2 minutes, and I swear his response was, "Cameron, is that really you? We all think you're dead." We had an emergency video call and Trevor was crying, literally crying when he saw me. He told me that Zachary had called everyone like a year and a half ago saying I had died in a car accident in Iceland, that my body had been cremated there according to my supposed wishes, and that there had been a small memorial for close family. Trevor told me he had tried to contact the U.S. Embassy in Iceland at the time to confirm, but Zachary told him everything was already handled and to please respect the family's grieving process. I couldn't breathe properly. I started searching for more information and discovered that my house, the house I had bought 3 years before going to Iceland, had been sold. My main bank account was closed. My LinkedIn said in memoriam there was a fake obituary online. My whole world was falling apart in real time. While I was sitting in that cafe in Reykjavik with cold coffee, I couldn't even drink anymore because I felt like I was going to throw up. I called my mom. It was the most surreal call of my life. When she answered and heard my voice, she fainted. Literally, I heard the phone drop and someone screaming in the background. Turns out she was at her new husband Henry's house. Yeah, apparently my mom had gotten married again and I had no idea. Henry took the phone, and when I explained who I was, he was also in total shock. He told me we needed to talk urgently, that there was a lot to explain, but that first he needed my mom to recover from the shock. The next 48 hours were a nightmare of calls, investigations, and increasingly disturbing discoveries. Henry, who turned out to be an incredibly calm guy who had worked in the police before retiring, helped me start putting the pieces together. My mom was devastated but also confused, because supposedly Zachary had shown her official documents of my death, had handled all the paperwork, had organized the memorial. She had been in mourning for me for 1.5 years, and now I was alive and calling from Iceland. I can't even imagine what she must have felt. Trevor helped me investigate more from the United States, and we discovered that my house had been sold 1 year ago by the estate executor, meaning Zachary, who had my power of attorney. The money from the sale, which was like $380,000, had gone to an account supposedly for estate expenses. My bank accounts had been emptied. My investments had been liquidated. And here's the sickest part. Zachary had taken out loans in my name for almost $200,000 in total, using my identity before my death, and obviously, he never paid them. So technically, I was in debt up to my ears, in credits I never asked for. I canceled my original return flight and took the next available flight home, which was leaving 2 days later. During those 2 days, Henry hired a private investigator, and we started discovering the magnitude of what Zachary had done. He hadn't just stolen my identity and my money, he had manipulated the entire family. He had gotten like $50,000 from my mom, telling her he needed that money for funeral expenses and legal fees in Iceland. He had told Stephanie, his wife, that I had left him money in a will that obviously never existed. He had convinced everyone that he was devastated by my death while literally stealing everything from me. When I arrived at the airport, Henry was waiting for me. I had never met him in person. My mom had started dating him after I left for Iceland. He hugged me and said, "Your mom is at home. She's processing all this. She's going to need time." He drove me to Henry's house, and when I walked in, my mom was sitting on the couch, and when she saw me, she just broke down. We stayed hugging and crying for what felt like hours. She kept touching my face, my head, my hands, like verifying that I was real, that I wasn't a ghost or a hallucination. She told me that Zachary had been so convincing. He had cried in front of her, had organized everything, had been there for her during her grief. He had come to visit her every week, had brought Abigail to distract her. And all the while he was spending my money, living in a bigger house he had bought with my stolen funds, basically building his perfect life on the ruins of mine. My mom felt guilty, like she should have known. But how was she supposed to know? Zachary had forged official documents, had created a complete and convincing story. Here's the part that still makes my blood boil. We discovered my mom was about to get married. Well, actually she had already married Henry like 6 months earlier in a small civil ceremony, but they had a big religious ceremony planned for 2 weeks after my return. Zachary was going to be the best man. He was going to give a speech about family and the importance of moving forward after loss. The hypocrisy was literally unbearable. Henry and I decided we couldn't let this continue. We contacted a lawyer specializing in fraud, a guy named Marcus, who Henry knew from his days in the police. Marcus reviewed everything and basically told me this was one of the most elaborate cases of identity fraud and family theft he had seen in his career. He explained that Zachary had committed multiple federal crimes: falsification of official documents, fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and probably more things we were going to discover. We decided the best way to confront him was in public, where he couldn't escape or make up another lie quickly. My mom's wedding seemed like the perfect moment. As twisted as it sounded, Marcus told us we had to document everything, that we couldn't just accuse him without solid evidence, so we spent those 2 weeks collecting every document, every bank transaction, every communication we could find. During those 2 weeks, I also discovered that Zachary had sabotaged my life even before I left for Iceland. I talked to Kimberly, my ex, who had broken up with me like 2 months before I left. Turns out Zachary had told her I had cheated on her, that he had seen me with another girl at a bar, detailed description and everything. All lies. Kimberly was devastated when I told her the truth. She said she really loved me but couldn't be with someone who had cheated on her, and that Zachary had been so convincing, so concerned about her, that she never doubted his story. I had applied for an incredible job at a prestigious cartography firm before leaving for Iceland, a position that was basically my dream job. I never got a response, and assumed they had rejected me. Turns out Zachary had intercepted the mail, had called the company pretending to be me, and had declined the offer. The company kept the voicemail, and when I finally heard it, it was Zachary's voice imitating me, saying I had accepted another position. Why did he do it? Because if I had taken that job, I would have stayed in the country. I would have been close by, and he wouldn't have been able to execute his plan to steal everything from me. The day of the wedding arrived. The ceremony was in a small but nice church, like 30 minutes from the city. There were maybe 100 guests, extended family, friends of my mom and Henry, people I didn't know. Zachary was there with Stephanie and Abigail. Seeing him was surreal. Like, there was my brother, the guy I had trusted completely, in his expensive suit that he probably bought with my money, smiling and greeting everyone like nothing was wrong. I waited until the priest asked if anyone had any objections to the marriage. I know, super dramatic, but Marcus told me we technically needed to do it at a moment where there were witnesses and where Zachary couldn't escape easily. I stood up from the back of the church and said, I have an objection, though it's not about the marriage exactly. The silence that followed was absolute. 100 people turned to look at me. I saw Zachary, and his face went from confusion to recognition to absolute panic in like 3 seconds. He started to get up from his seat, but Henry, who was ready for this, moved to block his exit. I walked down the aisle and people started murmuring. Some recognized me, others were confused. I heard someone say, "But that's Cameron, the one who's dead." I got to the front and spoke directly to Zachary, though technically the whole church could hear, because in the silence my voice echoed. I said, "Zachary, what a surprise to see you here. I must have survived that car accident in Iceland you told everyone about, right?" His face was pale, completely white. Stephanie was looking at him, not understanding anything. Abigail, poor thing, was scared because she felt the tension but didn't understand what was happening. Zachary tried to say something, stammer an excuse, but I continued. I took documents out of my jacket, copies of bank transactions, the fake deed to my house, the loans in my name, everything. Marcus was there too, in the back, with more documents and with 2 police officers he had coordinated to be present. I told Zachary he had 2 options. He could come with me and the police voluntarily, or they could arrest him right there in front of everyone, including his daughter. Stephanie stood up and asked him what was going on, if what I was saying was true. Zachary tried to lie. Said, I was confused, that there had been a misunderstanding. But his voice was shaking, and he was obviously lying. One of the officers approached and asked him to accompany them outside. Zachary looked at Stephanie, then at Abigail, and finally at my mom, who was crying in Henry's arms, and left the church. The rest of the ceremony obviously didn't continue. People were in shock. There was chaos, questions, confusion. My mom was devastated, not only because her son had been a criminal all this time, but because her wedding had become this dramatic and horrible moment. Henry was amazing with her. He calmed her down, explained to her that it was necessary, that we couldn't let Zachary keep lying to everyone. The following months were legally intense. The investigation revealed that the family lawyer, a guy named Douglas, who had worked with my family for years, had been complicit with Zachary. Douglas had helped forge the death certificate, had processed fraudulent documents, and had received money from Zachary to keep quiet. Both of them were arrested. The magnitude of the theft was worse than I initially thought. It wasn't just the house and bank accounts. Zachary had stolen my complete inheritance from my grandfather, who had died while I was in Iceland. My grandfather had left me like $2 million in a trust account I was supposed to receive when I turned 30, meaning while I was away. Zachary, with the power of attorney, and having proven I was dead, had claimed that money as my closest heir. He had spent almost half in that year and a half buying a new house, a luxury car, expensive vacations for his family, stupid investments that didn't pay off. Stephanie was devastated. When Marcus showed her all the evidence, she couldn't believe it. She told me that Zachary had told her the money came from work bonuses and smart investments. She worked as a nurse and didn't handle the family finances, trusted Zachary completely. She realized that for a year and a half she had been living a lie, that her husband was a criminal, that everything they had was stolen from her supposedly dead brother-in-law. Stephanie decided to cooperate completely with the investigation. She gave me access to Zachary's computers, his documents, everything. We found evidence that Zachary had been planning this since before I left for Iceland. There were Google searches for how to forge a death certificate, countries without extradition treaties, how to disappear permanently. The bastard had been researching how to rob me for 2 months before I even left. We also discovered emails between Zachary and Douglas, where they discussed how to maintain the lie, how to respond if anyone asked for details about my death, how to make sure no one investigated too much. Douglas had advised Zachary to keep a low profile, not to spend everything at once so as not to raise suspicions. Basically, they had planned for me to be dead indefinitely, and for Zachary to live off my inheritance for years. The trial was a media circus. The story was so absurd that local media covered it extensively. "Man fakes brother's death to steal millions" was the type of headline you'd see. Zachary hired an expensive lawyer, probably with the money he still had left from my inheritance, but he had no case. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, bank transactions, testimonies from Stephanie, from my mom, from Trevor, from Kimberly, about how Zachary had lied and manipulated everyone. During the trial, Zachary tried to argue that he did it because he was in a desperate financial situation, that he had gambling debts he hadn't told anyone about, that he needed the money to protect his family. It was a lie. The investigation showed he had no gambling debts, that he was financially stable before robbing me. He did it out of greed, plain and simple. He wanted a more luxurious life and decided my life was expendable to get it. The hardest part of the trial was when Abigail had to testify. The poor girl was 10 years old at the time and was completely confused. The judge was very careful with her. But they needed to establish that Abigail had been used as part of the lie. Zachary had taken her to visit Uncle Cameron's grave several times, a grave that obviously didn't exist, just to maintain the illusion. He had used his own daughter to give credibility to his lie, and that's what finally convinced the jury that this wasn't just a financial crime, it was a level of cruel psychological manipulation. Zachary was found guilty on all charges: fraud, identity theft, falsification of official documents, embezzlement. Douglas was also found guilty of conspiracy and complicity. The sentence was 25 years for Zachary, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. Douglas received 10 years. But here's the thing nobody tells you about these types of cases. Recovering the money is almost impossible. Of the $2 million Zachary had stolen, we were only able to recover like half. The rest he had spent on things that can't be resold for their full value, or on investments that lost money, or simply on experiences like vacations and expensive meals. The money, from the sale of my house, I recovered almost completely, but my house had already been bought by another family, and legally I couldn't recover it without an even more complex legal process. Zachary was placed under house arrest while assets were being processed for reimbursement with an electronic ankle monitor. This was like 2 months after sentencing. While they waited for the appeal his lawyer had filed, and the idiot tried to escape. He cut off the ankle monitor one night and ran. The police found him like 18 hours later, trying to cross the border into Canada. Turns out Zachary had been planning this too. Stephanie found documents hidden in the garage showing that Zachary had been researching how to flee the country. He had secret bank accounts abroad that even the original investigation hadn't found. And worst of all, he had plans to take Abigail. He had fake passports for him and his daughter. He was going to kidnap her and flee to a country without extradition. When Stephanie discovered this, she called me immediately. She was hysterical, terrified that Zachary would try to take Abigail. We called the police, and they launched a massive search. They caught him at the border trying to access one of those secret accounts he had hidden. He had like $400,000 in that account, money he had been transferring little by little during that year and a half, preparing for the case that they discovered him. The escape attempt added more charges: violation of parole, attempted illegal border crossing, and they almost added a charge of attempted kidnapping for the plans to take Abigail. But technically, since he never executed that plan, the prosecutor decided not to proceed with that. Anyway, those additional charges basically guaranteed he wasn't getting out of prison for decades. Stephanie filed for divorce immediately after the escape attempt. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for her, realizing that the man she had married, the father of her daughter, wasn't only a criminal, but was willing to use his own daughter as escape currency. The divorce was quick. She got full custody of Abigail, and the judge ordered that Zachary couldn't have contact with his daughter until she was of age and decided for herself if she wanted to see him. My mom was devastated. She had effectively lost her oldest son, the boy she had trusted, who had taken care of her during her grief for me. Henry was amazing with her, helped her process everything, took her to therapy, made sure she was surrounded by support. They rescheduled their religious ceremony for 6 months later, a small and private ceremony only with close friends, and this time it was perfect. No drama, just love and celebration. The relationship between my mom and me was complicated for a while. Part of her felt guilt for having believed Zachary, for not questioning his story, for not trying to contact me directly in Iceland. I told her 1,000 times it wasn't her fault, that Zachary has been incredibly meticulous in his deception, that he had forged official documents that looked completely real, that nobody could have known. But guilt is hard to shake off, I guess. Over time, we recovered our relationship. We see each other every week now. We have dinner together. She tells me stories from my childhood that somehow feel more precious now after having been dead for a year and a half. Henry became a surprisingly good father figure in my life, something I didn't expect to need at 30 years old, but that I deeply appreciate. Trevor and I became closer than ever. He was instrumental in helping me discover the truth, in being my ally when my whole world was falling apart. He told me that during that year and a half he thought I was dead. He had mourned my loss, that he had kept photos of us from college, that he missed me every day. Knowing I had friends who really cared about me that way was comforting in the midst of all the chaos. Kimberly and I also reconnected. Not romantically immediately, but we started talking, rebuilding the friendship we had. She was in a relationship when I came back, so we didn't force anything. But there was something still there, you know, that connection that never really went away. She broke up with her boyfriend like 6 months after my return, and after a reasonable time, we started dating again. We took things very slowly this time, rebuilding trust, making sure it was real and not just nostalgia or shared trauma. Now, a year and a half after my return, we're pretty serious, and it's amazing to think that Zachary almost destroyed this too, with his lies. Stephanie and I developed a strange but nice relationship. She feels terribly guilty about having lived off my stolen money, though obviously she didn't know. I've told her 1,000 times it's not her fault, but she insists on making it up to me somehow. We see each other often now, mainly because of Abigail, who needed to maintain connection with her father's family, even if her father was a criminal. Abigail is an incredible girl, resilient and sweet despite everything she's been through. Stephanie is in therapy, Abigail too, processing all of this. Financially, I'm rebuilding. I recovered almost half of my inheritance, which was placed in a trust account supervised by the court. Part of that money was also allocated for Abigail, because the judge decided she shouldn't suffer completely for her father's crimes, which seems fair to me. It's not her fault. I had to buy a new house, obviously. Start from scratch in many ways. But I have a good job now with a respectable cartography firm. The same job Zachary had sabotaged for me years ago, who contacted me after reading about my case in the news and offered me the position I should have had from the beginning. I've thought a lot about why Zachary did this. The psychologists who testified at the trial talked about sociopathy, narcissism, lack of empathy. But the truth is, I don't know if those labels really explain how someone can do this to their own brother. We grew up together, shared a room for years, played together, fought like normal brothers. At what point did he decide my life was worth less than his greed? Was it something that was always there? Some fundamental flaw in his character that none of us saw? Or was it a gradual decision, a slippery slope of small betrayals that eventually became this? I don't have answers. I've been going to therapy, trying to process all this. The trauma of discovering you were dead, that your own family mourned you, that your brother betrayed you in the most complete way possible. My therapist says it's normal to feel a mix of rage, sadness, confusion, and even a bit of irrational guilt for having trusted him. Some days I'm fine. Other days I wake up and the first thing I think is, my brother tried to erase me from existence. The hardest part is explaining this to new people I meet. Do you have siblings? Is a casual question on 16, dates or at social events. What do I say? Technically, yes. But he's in prison for faking my death and stealing millions from me? It's not exactly the kind of conversation you want to have on a first date. Kimberly helped me find a balance, a way to mention, I have a brother, but we're not in contact without going into all the disturbing details unless I really trust the person. I've received interview requests from TV shows, from true crime podcasts, even from Netflix producers interested in making a documentary. I've rejected most of them. I don't want my life to become entertainment, you know what I mean? It was public enough during the trial. But I did do an interview with a non-profit organization that works with victims of identity fraud and family theft, because I felt my story might help others recognize warning signs or at least know they're not alone if something similar happens to them. I started a small foundation with part of the recovered money, focused on helping victims of financial fraud navigate the legal system. It's ironic, I guess, using the money Zachary stole to help other people who have been victimized in similar ways. It gives me some sense of purpose, like something good could come out of all this mess. As for Zachary, I haven't visited him in prison and don't plan to. He wrote me a letter like 6 months ago. A long letter where he tried to explain his actions, ask for forgiveness, say he was in therapy and working on himself. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I don't know if I'll ever respond to it. Part of me wants to understand, wants to have that closure conversation, but another bigger part just wants to leave it in the past. My therapist says there's no right answer, that I should do what feels right for me, and for now, not responding feels right. My mom goes to visit him every 2 months. I don't blame her. He's her son too, and I understand that maternal love doesn't turn off just because your son committed horrible crimes. Henry accompanies her for emotional support. She tells me about the visits if I ask, but I usually don't ask. I don't need to know how Zachary is, if he's okay, if he regrets it, if he's planning something else. That part of my life is closed. Abigail asks about me sometimes, according to Stephanie. She asks why her dad did what he did, why she can't see him, if I hate him. These are impossible questions to answer to an 1-year-old girl. Stephanie and I try to keep it simple, to explain that her dad made very bad decisions, but that doesn't define her, that she's not responsible for his actions, that she can still have a relationship with her family even if her dad can't be part of it right now. I've thought about writing a book about all this. Not to profit from the story, but because writing it all down, having a complete record of what happened, feels important somehow. Like, documenting it gives it validity. You know what I mean? Like by putting it into words, I could process it better, understand it better. My therapist says it would be therapeutic, that many trauma victims find healing in narrativizing their experience. Maybe I'll do it someday, when I have more emotional distance. The thing is, life goes on. It sounds cliché, but it's true. 3 years after returning from Iceland, 2 years after the trial, my life is almost normal. I go to work, go out with Kimberly, have dinner with my mom and Henry, see my friends. There are moments when I almost forget all this happened, and then something reminds me. A news article, an innocent question from a stranger, a nightmare where I'm reading my own obituary again, and it all comes back. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand how my brother could do this to me. Psychologists have their theories, the jury had its verdict, the media had their sensational stories, but at the end of the day, only Zachary really knows what he was thinking, what motivated him, how he could look my mother in the eyes for a year and a half, knowing her son wasn't really dead. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. Some answers are maybe too dark, too disturbing to look for. But what I do know is that I survived. Literally, I survived a faked death. But I also survived the betrayal, the shock, the trauma of discovering your life had been stolen. And not only did I survive, I'm rebuilding. I have Kimberly, I have my mom and Henry, I have Trevor and other friends who proved to be true. I have my career back, I have a future, I have my identity, I have my life. Zachary tried to erase me, but here I am, more alive than ever, telling my story, helping others, building something new on the ruins of what he destroyed. And I guess that's the best revenge, right? Not that he's in prison, though that's necessary justice, but that I'm here, happy, healing, living, while he's trapped with the consequences of his decisions for the next decades. There are still difficult days. Days when the rage comes back, days when I wonder what would have happened if I had never gone to Iceland, if I had never given him power of attorney, if I had seen the warning signs that, looking back, were there all along. But those days are increasingly less frequent. Most days now are good, normal, filled with the small things that make life worth living. And that, I guess, is all I can ask for after having been dead for a year and a half. A second chance at life, a chance to build something real and true, surrounded by people who really love me and don't just see my life as something they can exploit for their own benefit. It's more than what many victims of these types of crimes get, and I don't take it for granted for a single second.